Good morning to everyone, and welcome. My name is Jim Pello, and I'm the CEO and President of Council on International Educational Exchange, better known as CIEE. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you here to our global headquarters at 304th Street for the 4th Annual Justice for Women Lecture Series. And I'm pleased to share with you that in addition to this large group that we have sitting here on the second floor, we also have over 200 CIEE staff, students, alumni, and friends in 25 countries that are streaming live right now. There are some students, Ruchira, in class, and they're expecting a pop quiz at the end of this. So we want to make sure that we stay on time, which is tough for me to do. So I want to welcome everyone, and I also want to note what a tribute it is and a privilege to us to host this for the 4th year in a row. The lecture series began, the Justice for Women Lecture Series, which is now housed at the University of Maine School of Law, started in 2011, and each year its goal is to invite an internationally well-known and well-recognized advocate for girls' and women's rights to come to Portland and share with us their stories and their accomplishments in hopes of stimulating us and motivating us. This program was created by Maine native Catherine Lee, who you'll meet in just a moment. Catherine is an attorney by trade, but was influenced as a high school student when she traveled abroad to Brazil for a full year. That was a few years ago, back in the day, to Brazil. She spent most of her year working on issues around climate change, but she's devoted and committed to the idea that we can learn from women leaders from around the world. And all of us at CIEE share Kathy's vision, and we're honored to be one of the founding sponsors of the Justice for Women Lecture Series. Over the past 4 years, we've had the privilege of hosting in this very room women from Botswana, Liberia, Afghanistan, and today, India. Some of you were with us for each of those years. You'll remember Honorable Unity Dow, who joined us in 2011 and shared her views of the importance of human rights and changing laws to protect those that can't protect themselves. In 2012, you'll remember Lema Bowie, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, was with us to share her story of how she used the power of individual action and nonviolent resistance to change the civil war issue in Liberia. And last year, we were with Dr. Seema Samar on the eve of the presidential elections in Afghanistan. And she shared with us her stories of overcoming barriers in Afghanistan to educate and empower young girls. So today we welcome Ruchira Gupta, who also is an incredible change agent, and she'll be telling us her story of how she changes lives in India shortly. But before I turn the podium over to Kathy to introduce Ruchira, I want to share with you and introduce a few special guests and explain why we think they're special and why we're delighted to have them with us today. All of you from CIEE know our mission. It's to create opportunities that bring people together from different cultures and different communities in different countries. And in some ways that's very simple, and in other ways very complex. At times, to advance that mission, we often partner with other like-minded organizations. Several years ago, when we began working with Justice for Women, we also began working with an organization called Girl Rising. They're known best for producing the film Girl Rising, which presents the stories of 9 young girls in 9 countries. And it demonstrates the importance of educating girls from developing nations. In fact, it makes a very strong argument that the #1 return on investment we can all make is to educate young girls from developing nations. It's a mission that's consistent with our mission and consistent with Justice for Women Lecture Series. And so today, I'm pleased to share 2 things. First, in the last few years, thanks to CIEE's network, we've had 500 screenings of Girl Rising in over 70 countries. So I want everyone to please give yourselves a round of applause for that, because I know a lot of you helped with that. I'm even more pleased to share with you that today, joining us is the very talented senior producer of the film Girl Rising, who traveled up to see us from New York City. And I think when she put the date in her calendar, she didn't think it was going to be 14 degrees and negative wind chill. But Casey, I promise, it warms up really soon. Tomorrow is spring. We should have warm weather tomorrow. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Casey Jennings. So over the last few years, we've had the real privilege of working with both Justice for Women and Girl Rising. We help with lectures, we help with screenings, but we also help students participate in our programs. We actually help young girls experience the international education that we value so deeply. In 2013, we actually combined our efforts with previous Justice for Women speakers Unity Dow and Lema Bowie. And we provided Girl Rising scholarships to young girls from Botswana and Liberia so they could attend high school summer leadership programs on CIEE programs. Last year, we did the same thing with girls that were actually featured in the film Girl Rising. Two young ladies from Cambodia and Sierra Leone actually participated with their colleagues on our programs. And this year, we're striving to increase access to international education right here in Maine by providing scholarships to students from Deering High School. Over the last couple of years, we've developed a very special partnership with Deering High School for many reasons. First, their strong leadership at the top, and its principal and director of global programs. Second, it has one of the most progressive international education curriculums. And third, it has one of the most diverse populations in the state. Many of you might be surprised to learn that Deering High School actually is the most diverse high school north of Boston. And its students come from 54 different countries. They speak 27 different languages. That's more than we speak in our participant services offices here, which is quite an accomplishment. They're widely recognized as one of the most globally minded schools, and they've been part of our family. We've adopted them into the Justice for Women and Girl Rising family. So please join me in saluting two exceptionally globally minded leaders at Deering High School who are with us today. Principal Ira Waltz is not here because he's at a parent meeting. Parents can be so difficult. But we do have Director of Global Programs, Carlo Gomez, who actually does all the work. So, now, to support their commitment, we've decided that we're going to invest in a series of scholarships for Deering High School students this year. Two programs we're going to present to Deering High School students. The first is part of our National Global Navigator Scholarship Program. So several Deering students will receive scholarships this month to study abroad this summer in one of our 16 international locations where they will study language, culture, leadership, and service. And second, as part of our partnership with Justice for Women and Girl Rising, 4 exceptional young ladies from Deering High School have been named the 2015 Girl Rising Scholars and will attend CIEE's Language, Leadership, and Service programs this summer in the Dominican Republic, Japan, and Spain. We have the honored guests here with us, and so please join me in congratulating Portland's future global leaders from Deering High School, the 2015 Girl Rising Scholars who are in the front row. I'm going to invite you guys to stand up and represent Priscilla, Nilab, Nayamut, and Zeta. Turn away. Thank you. Ladies, your CIE program doesn't start till the summer, but I think your first lesson is about to begin right here today. It's my pleasure now to welcome to the podium Kathy Lee, who will really kick the program off. She's the founder, she's the heart and soul of the Justice for Women lecture series, and she's going to give us a special introduction of our speaker today. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everybody. And Jim, thank you so much, not just for that introduction, but for your partnership. CIEE has been with the Justice for Women program from day one, and he's really helped us probably more than any other single individual to fulfill the dream, which is to not only bring an extraordinary, courageous woman from the developing world each year, but to have that amplify, have a ripple effect, and take advantage of that opportunity to do so many other things around it. And Jim has really, really helped us to make that possible. 4 years ago, when I first got the idea, I took it to the law school, to Dean Peter Pitagoff, and I'm going to ask Dean Pitagoff to also stand up and be recognized, because he took this on and has supported it and has been committed to it from the beginning. Dean Pittigoff, after 10 years of service to the law school, is going to step down as dean, stay on as a teacher, but step down as dean. And we now have with us the dean designate, Danielle Conway, who has been following Ruchira around this week and has already shown her commitment and excitement. Let me ask you to welcome Danielle Conway, who she's another one who comes from Hawaii, who probably had no clue what she was in for. Jim mentioned my high school experience. I lived in Brazil for a year when I was 15, and that changed my life, just seeing another culture, learning another language. And I've been traveling the world ever since. My climate change work takes me often to Southern Africa, but to other parts of the world. And as I started to think about what can I do in Maine that would have value to people here. Most people don't get the opportunity to participate in a CIEE exchange program, to do what I did. So I thought, let me bring some of those amazing women I've been meeting from the developing world to Maine and let them talk about what they do. And we can learn that everybody can be an activist. Everybody can bring change in their own environment. So it's so important to do that. So it's very exciting to be able to bring these women and see the response. There's so much interest. We've not only given an annual lecture, the lecture is tonight actually at Hannaford Hall, and with 670 people registered, we had to cut off registration, but we expect a full house. But we have a lot of community engagement with organizations like CIEE, with high schools, with colleges, with new Mainers. We've been this trip to Deering, to Colby, to Bates, to Hardy Girls, Healthy Women in Waterville. We met with judges. Ruchira ran a program for about 90 people in Portland, Greater Portland, who work in law enforcement to fight trafficking here in Maine. The goal is to create the opportunities for as many Mainers as possible to meet and get to know some of the amazing, courageous women from the developing world. We have a lot to learn from them. As I get to the introduction for Ruchira, I want to say my sister Beth and her daughter Eliza are here from New York City to meet Ruchira. And after spending 4 days with her, I feel like I've gained another sister. We're fortunate to have Ruchira with us this week. She started her career as a reporter, as a journalist, and she was in Nepal investigating some other issue, some other event. And as she went from rural village to rural village, these villages with no water, no electricity, really remote, she started to notice that there are no girls and no young women. And she eventually started asking the men who are hanging out, playing cards, talking, drinking tea, where are your girls? Where are the women? And they told her they're in Bombay, which was 1,400 kilometers from this remote village. And she came across, just stumbled across, the sex trade and felt at that point she needed to investigate that. So she made a film called The Selling of Innocence. You can see a clip of it on YouTube about this sex trafficking that she stumbled across. She won an Emmy for that film 18 years ago and decided journalism was too limiting for her. She needed to do something about this horrible scourge that she was discovering, and went on to found APNIAP, her organization, which is a grassroots organization to end human trafficking and increase choices for at-risk girls and women. But not only does she do that, she's fought for decades to highlight the link between trafficking and prostitution laws and to lobby policymakers to shift the blame from the victims, the prostituted women, to the men, the demand, to try to address the demand in order to eliminate the problem. She works in red light districts, in and around brothels, which is a nice word for whorehouses. It's dangerous. She's had a knife pulled on her. She can tell you more about the dangers that she faces daily in order to do this work. but she cares so deeply about rescuing these girls. And as you'll see from the clip we're going to show you, one girl at a time. Today, Apneap, whose name translates to self-empowerment, is helping more than 20,000 girls and women in India. She's here to tell us about her work, about the horrors of sex trafficking in India and other countries, including the US, and right here in Maine. She spent this week meeting with people in Maine who are either victims, who work in law enforcement or social services, trying to help the girls and women in Maine who have been trapped in prostitution. She's been talking this week to so many people connected in one way or another to fighting sex trafficking in Maine. And she's helping us to have those conversations, which have been under the rug or not existing until she came here to help us shine a light on it. So I'm going to ask you to welcome Ruchira, and then we're going to show a clip, and then she's going to come up and talk to you. So join me in welcoming Ruchira Gupta.
Now to the second part of Special Correspondent Fred de Sam Lazaro's report on the struggles to stop sex trafficking in India. Last night, we witnessed a failed attempt to rescue young women forced into prostitution, one in which police appeared to be covering up for the traffickers. In tonight's report, Fred follows another rescue attempt, one with a very different outcome. His story is part of our Agents for Change series.
In India's impoverished rural state of Bihar, people struggle to live off the land. One of the few businesses that thrives is underground.
This is one of the epicenters in the world for human trafficking. Little girls are trafficked into prostitution. They are put on buses and trucks and taken to the big brothels of Bombay, Delhi and Calcutta, but sometimes closer by.
Ruchira Gupta and the human rights group she founded, Apne Aap, or On Our Own, is working to change the tradition of lower caste women being channeled into the sex trade. The group sued authorities to provide schooling for girls rescued from brothels, and it runs a shelter for the women and their daughters. But first, Apne Aap has to work with the police to free the women.
So here is the law. We've printed it out for you.
And that means explaining a new law the group helped get passed. It punishes traffickers and not those who were prostituted.
We have to arrest the trafficker.
Sometimes that task is not easy.
The police is part of our society, and if the entire society believes that a girl is of less value, a low caste girl is of even less value, so unless their mindset changes, they don't even try to impose the law because they think this is not a crime.
Just the previous night, we followed an Apne Aap team hoping to rescue a young woman from a brothel. The raid failed, possibly because the police tipped off the traffickers. Ruchira, what's going on?
I think the girl has been spirited away. We were kept waiting at the police station for 2 hours by local police officers who must have informed the traffickers here that we were on our way to rescue them.
In this morning's raid, the exact location was kept secret from the police until the last moment. Still, rumors of a raid had spread and brothels cleared out. But Fatima Khatun, an Apne Aap staffer who grew up and still lives in the red light district, is a key source of intelligence. She led the search to a home where she said a girl was hidden. Not long after indignant protests from the homeowners, a frightened young woman emerged.
There's no reason to cry. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
As the young woman was led to a waiting car, Fatima Khatun led the team to a brothel where she'd been allegedly working, hoping to gather evidence against her trafficker. Apparently, the man shown here talking to police and also taunting Khatun. A loud and physical altercation ensued before he was put into the police paddy wagon to cool down at Gupta's insistence.
He was following us to try to talk the police out of it. And then he started abusing Fatima to provoke her not to go there by calling her all kinds of names, from whore to all kinds of things. Provoking her so that she would hit him and then he could hit her back. He's trying to stop us from going to the brothel. Here's another room which is being used as the brothel, where that girl we rescued. This is the bed where the customers are brought and these girls are put forward for the customers. And they are locked up in rooms like this with iron bars on the window, as you can see. Here's a little condom lying here.
Please take a picture of this. Get that book up there. It probably has names of the customers.
Next, another shack-like brothel. Here they hope to rescue 2 teenage girls, one forced to prostitute herself, the other the daughter of this woman who owned the place. Gupta says it's not uncommon for women to be involved in the business of trafficking. Many were themselves trafficked when they were young.
Ruchira, what's happening right now?
She says those girls are in school. So I'm saying, fine, take us to the school, we'll go and meet the girls. We'll meet the principal, we'll meet the girls. So she's refusing to go there.
On what grounds?
Saying that I'll bring her at 4 o'clock to the office, which of course she won't, but she won't take us.
So where do things stand then?
No, take her in. Let's go.
They are arresting her?
Please turn the camera off.
No.
We were asked to get out of the way because we were causing interference with the process of arresting the alleged trafficker. It appears to be happening right behind me.
The threat of going to jail seemed to cause the woman to relent. She was let out of the police vehicle just as I began talking to Gupta. Suddenly, a new development.
The girl is suddenly found, who she said was in school. So let's go and see what's going on.
It was the 14-year-old daughter of the brothel owner. Until recently, she had been enrolled in school and even lived in the Apne-Aap shelter. But she was pulled out after 7th grade, being prepared, Gupta said, to go into the sex trade, a common tradition here passed from mother to daughter. Negotiations resumed with the chastened brothel keeper and her son, who in another common practice works as a pimp.
Do you want to be a pimp?
No, ma'am.
So why are you doing this? You're preparing a 14-year-old to prostitute herself. You have another girl in the back, Sampatia, that you've enslaved. Have you no shame? And what's the use of you crying? Sampatia cries every day when customers come and rape her.
Sampatia, the girl being prostituted, would not be produced on this day. But Gupta was able to negotiate a deal for the daughter, 1 more year in school.
Chunni has agreed that she can study till class 8. I hope the daughter will become stronger, more educated, and she will be able to negotiate with her mother. And we will together make her go on and stay on in school for another 2 years. It's year by year that we negotiate for a child. And even a year of not being raped, a year of not being beaten is great. It's better than a year of being raped and beaten.
For the young woman brought back to school and to live in the Apne-Aap shelter, it was hard to see much beyond her immediate fears and turmoil, torn and confused by family loyalty and tradition. Counseling for her is just one of the tasks that lay ahead for the Apne-Aap staff. They'll do the same for the girl rescued earlier this busy day. Her testimony will be key to building the case against her alleged trafficker. In its 12 years, the anti-trafficking group Apne-Aap has managed to successfully prosecute 66 traffickers. But more critically, Gupta says the first 4 alumni of its shelter now hold tickets out of generational prostitution and poverty. They've gone on to enroll in college. This is Fred Sam Lazaro in Bihar, India, for the PBS NewsHour.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at St. Mary's University of Minnesota.
Thank you. Namaste. I bring to you greetings from the women and girls of Apne Aap, some of whom you saw today in the documentary. And many of them know that I am here in a city in Portland, Maine, where we are trying to work together to also end sex trafficking. They know that I have met with high school students. They know that I've met with college students. They know that I've met with law enforcement and survivors, and that it is possible to work across countries and cultures to end what is now a modern form of slavery. So they send you their greetings, and they feel emboldened by the fact that there's a community across oceans and across continents also working to do the same thing. My own journey to work against sex trafficking, as Catherine said, Catherine has invited me here as part of the Justice for Women lecture series, and I'm really pleased to be here as part of that, to follow 3 women who have also brought about change in their countries. Because as Catherine said, that I have realized the value of collaboration and education, and these are the 2 themes that I want to talk about today in the CIEE lecture. My own journey began as a journalist, and I noticed missing girls in villages, ended up making a documentary on the subject to first expose the problem. I won an Emmy for it, but talking to the women inside the brothels of Bombay was a life-changing experience for me, because I had no idea as a journalist, even though I'd covered war and famine and hunger and ethnic conflict, that there could be this kind of deliberate exploitation of one human being by another. I could not fathom how somebody could rape a 9-year-old girl, how people could lock up 12-year-old girls in brothels and trot them out for 5 years to 8 or 10 customers a night and actually live off the profits of that. It was just unimaginable, and I felt angry, outraged, as a woman, of course, as a citizen of my own country, as a citizen of the world, that this kind of flesh trade existed in my lifetime, my generation, my country, our world. And so after making the documentary, I gave up journalism and talked to the women to see what I could do, the women who had told their stories. And the women, in fact, the first thing they said was that whatever had happened to them had happened, but they wanted a different future for their daughters. And I asked them, I said, what do you mean by a different future? What do you want to do with them? Because I couldn't understand how we could get kids out of the brothels. I was a journalist, and I had no idea. And they said education. They said, we want to send our children to school. And that's how Apne Aap was born, because what we did was that we first, with the 22 women in prostitution in the red light district of Bombay, we got a room in an abandoned municipal school and hired a teacher. And we started educating the kids, the daughters of the prostituted women, and started preparing them for school. And as the kids began to learn and get ready for mainstream schools, we found that the principal did not want to admit the children because they were children of prostituted women. They said the other parents will object. And we needed to get the kids into formal schools. So then we organized the women and as mothers and told them that you will have to go and negotiate with the principal. And the women went and they begged and they campaigned and they cried and they said that our children are children too and they are the future of the nation. And the principal gave in and the kids went to school. And today a kid from that school is in a college in New York called Bard College. Another kid is an animation artist working in Bombay. Another one is a manager in a Domino's pizza place, and so on and so forth. Now, those 22 women, of them only one is alive. Most have died from AIDS-related complications, but their dreams are living on in their children. And also their dreams are living on in the other women that we have reached out to. And I started by talking about the fact that today my 2 themes will be education and collaboration. Sisterhood is global. Catherine said that she's found a new sister, so do I feel that. And the fact that we work together to get these kids into school, I didn't do it alone. There were the 22 women who were the mothers. There was the school principal who gave up his prejudice against prostituted kids. There were people who sponsored the kids. There was someone in Bard College who said, okay, I'm going to get this girl a scholarship to be able to come here. Each thing was linked to everything else. And also what happened was that our sisterhood grew. So the prostituted women would say that this is not the only red light area that exists. Do you know that we have another red light area on the outskirts of Bombay in Bhiwandi? Another woman would say, I was trafficked from Nepal via this village in Bihar, or via Calcutta, or via Delhi. So slowly our program expanded, and we started trying to help more women, started by opening community classrooms and getting the kids into school. And today we reach out to more than 20,000 women and girls and their family members, because sometimes we also put boys into school. We can't take a sister and put her into school and leave her brother behind. And you know, we are beginning to see the change, because the girls who are getting educated, the girls who are in college, are now becoming the role models for communities who for generations, and I'm talking about 150 years, have been suffering from intergenerational prostitution. Prostitution which is passed down from mother to daughter. And how does that happen? Because no mother, and this is, I've traveled across the world in different countries, sat inside brothels, sat in a circle with women in prostitution. I've met survivors in Portland, Maine. I've talked to people in New York, across the world. And no mother wants her daughter to be put into prostitution. No mother. She will do everything she can till she has no control over the situation. So, you know, what has happened is that as we reached out to these 20,000 women and girls to put their daughters into school and for the daughters to get educated, we saw the daughters then try to protect the mothers. So a daughter who's got a job in Domino's will rent an apartment and pull her mother out and put her into an apartment outside the red light district. In communities where there's intergenerational prostitution, where there seemed no hope, prostitution seemed inevitable. And these are communities who were labeled as criminal tribes under British colonialism because they were nomads and they refused to settle down in plantations and factories and you know, do basically slave work, like indentured labor. They refused, and they said we have our own traditions and our own way of making an income, from making herbal medicines to ironmongering, etc., like the Roma of Europe. And these communities were marginalized, labeled as criminals, as pimps, and as thieves, and you know, cut off from access to education, from jobs, land, everything. And they ended up, because many of them were also entertainers, they could sing and dance and perform and do acrobatics. So prostitution began to be the only form of livelihood left to them, because the police would pick up the men, put them into jail, ask them to pimp their own sisters and mothers, and the men would be so badly beaten that they would have to do it. And pimping became passed down from father to son, and prostitution from mother to daughter. And now there are at least, at a minimum, 16 such caste communities in India, scattered over India, living in caste ghettos on the edges of villages with no access to running water or electricity. The school is far away, the police station is far away, and they still continue to be neglected and stigmatized as pimps and thieves, and still not given admission in schools or given job training or bank accounts or any kind of government IDs. So, you know, when a girl from this community actually ends up going to school, suddenly people realize, the people inside the community who thought this was their fate and destiny, that it's not inevitable. The society around that community also begins to realize it, from local government authorities to the law enforcement officials to parents who thought these are prostitutes' children and nothing can happen. Suddenly they see these children doing well, they are well dressed, they are performing well in school, they are helping their mothers out. So things begin to change. The whole ecosystem, and I can see before my eyes, is changing thanks to these girls. And thanks to education of these girls, thanks to the fact that we fought it out and hung in there. And you know, the other thing we found was collaboration. Because when I started working in India, I found that it was impossible to do anything because of the deep prejudice and stigma. And I thought, okay, then you know, I would go to police commissioners, or I would go to the district magistrate in this in place where I would be starting a small community classroom in a caste ghetto like the kind you saw here, and the district magistrate would say, but these are low caste girls, nothing can be done for them, you can't do it. And I would say, no, I'm going to show you. Or I would go to the police commissioner in Bombay, and he would say that, oh, men will be men, prostitution is as old as the hills, you can't change anything. And I would look at the Indian law, and the Indian law was also based on old British colonial laws, so in which the victim was the one who was picked up for soliciting in a public place, and traffickers had very light fines and sentences against them, and there was no kind of punishment for the Johns at all. So then I began to think, how do we change the law? In India, there was absolute resistance, but luckily, thanks to this documentary that I made called The Selling of Innocence, I was able to reach the Clintons at the White House, and they introduced me to Senator Brownback and Senator Wellstone. And we showed the movie at the United Nations, but also what we were able to do was to create a bipartisan bill to create a law in the US, which also did not have a law on trafficking. And in 2000 or 2002, I can't remember the exact year, I actually went and testified to the US Senate as an Indian citizen, saying it's a global problem, and that led to the passage of the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, which was just reauthorized yesterday. And what that did was that it did two things. It helped this country, of course, victims and survivors in this country, and those who were trafficked here, because they were no longer treated as illegal immigrants, and they began to get services from legal support to health support to housing support. But also what it did was it created a global trafficking in persons inside the State Department, and that office began to fund NGOs abroad to work on the issue of trafficking, but it also began to put pressure on countries abroad to change laws on trafficking. And that helped because we could say, but the US government is saying so. Also at the same time, what we did was that we were able to build alliances and friendships and collaborate with NGOs across the world, where I'd shown The Selling of Innocence, sparked off a conversation just like we are doing here. And together we were able to reach out to our own member states, who then put pressure on the United Nations, and as civil society and as governments for global family, we were able to create a UN protocol to end trafficking in persons, especially women and children. And that protocol then became the standard that all countries who were member states of the United Nations could aspire to. And 110 countries, including my own country, then signed the UN protocol. And because they signed the UN protocol, they had to amend the law to meet the standards of the UN protocol. And therefore, while I could not convince them to do it initially, over a period of years, through collaborations with other countries and other UN agencies and other civil society activists and NGOs, we were able to do so. And in that, what we did very, very importantly was that we shifted the blame from the victim to the perpetrator. And how did we do that? We called on countries to address the demand side of human trafficking. And we said that human trafficking is not based on a choice of a girl like the one you saw. It's basically based on her choicelessness, that she's poor, she's female, she's low caste, she's a teenager, she has no control over her life or her body, and somebody else is making these decisions for her or preying upon her vulnerability. Because of all these four things, she does not have access to a safe house, she does not have access to education, and she does not definitely have job skills. So anybody can come and just tell her that I'll get you a job in the big city, or I will marry you, or I will even put you into prostitution, and at least you'll have food and a bed. And the girl succumbs, or her family members give in. And the reason that they do it is not because the 14-year-old is saying, I'm going to grow up to be a prostitute, but because she is starving, she's disempowered. And because, why does someone come and prey upon her? The trafficker, the recruiter, the transporter, the pimp, the brothel keeper, the reason they come and prey upon her is because there's a customer, a John at the end of it. And he is demanding young girls. He says, I want a young girl, I want someone young, docile, fair-skinned, voluptuous. And the traffickers go looking for where they can find such a person, in low-caste ghettos, in poor slums, teenage girls looking for love. And you know, the issue is that what I found as I began to work on this issue and collaborate with different countries is that the same situation exists everywhere. So the last girl who you saw in Bihar may not look exactly like the last girl you see in America, but here too you have someone who's the last of the last, who's poor, weak, female, and here she's a person of color, or she could be Native American or of indigenous groups, and you know, who's also vulnerable. And traffickers prey upon her because there's a demand. And in the last 4 days, I've seen, like, outside, when I went to speak at the Deering High School, I learned that there were pimps actually standing outside the school to prey upon young girls who were maybe looking for love, and they had come from refugee families. They were feeling that they had not fitted into this society. They were feeling isolated. They could be sexually abused at home. There are so many reasons that people, and these pimps know exactly who to recruit. And so they would just recruit her right there outside the Deering High School in Main Portland and pimp her to a John in a hotel room right here. But there would be no movement. It would be the same city where the girl was born. But as per the UN protocol on trafficking and as per the US law, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, that girl would be considered trafficked because somebody had recruited her, somebody had taken advantage of her vulnerability, tricked her, seduced her, and they had used her for the purpose of exploitation. So movement was not a necessity for her trafficking, and the pimp was the trafficker in this case. So she did not have to be taken across borders and across countries. It was just right here. And then over the years, again, what I found was that I met survivors, and they said, yes, they were born here, they were trafficked here. One survivor told me it was the vice principal of a school who had sexually abused her, and because of that, she became vulnerable inside the school system, and then she began to be bullied, and then she ran away from home, and then a pimp started trafficking her. So these are stories right here, and they're exactly the story of someone taking advantage of a girl's vulnerability. And the one way of dealing with it is to break the silence, as we all are doing by starting conversations and including the voices of survivors as we break the silence. The second way of dealing with it is through collaborations, just as we are doing and just as the Justice for Women series is doing, by bringing people here to talk about the commonalities of our inequalities. And the third most important thing to do is through education. Because when you are poor and you are disempowered, the one weapon you have when you don't even have access to justice is education, because that's one way you can get out of the cycle of abuse and re-abuse. And in India, you saw, of course, intergenerational prostitution. So, you know, that's why it's important that CIEE, which is such a wonderful organization and organizing education exchanges between last girls in one country with last girls in another, and Girl Rising, which is trying to help the voices of girls go from country to country, city to city, you know, are working in collaboration with an organization like mine, Apne Aap Women Worldwide, where we can share real life stories about what's going on in a village in Bihar and how we are using the right to education to combat it. The school that you saw is a boarding school in Bihar, where that girl now is doing well, the girl you saw sitting at the bed on the bed at the end of the documentary, and she wants to rescue 2 more of her friends. And so one girl at a time leads to 20,000 girls, women, and family members, and suddenly it becomes a movement. And you know, Apne Aap Women Worldwide, my NGO, has a very simple approach to ending sex trafficking. And that approach is basically, we call it the 10-asset approach. And a girl, or we go into a red light area or a slum or a brothel, rent a school, rent a room, put a straw mat on the floor, and hire a teacher and start teaching. But what we do is help that girl or a woman go through gaining 10 assets over a period of 18 months to 5 years. And those 10 assets range from a safe space to education, to self-confidence, to political and campaign skills, to government IDs, to government subsidies like food coupons, housing vouchers, to legal skills about how to file a police complaint, to testify in court, and bank accounts, job skills, and friendship networks, coming back to collaborations, both small and big. So we form self-empowerment groups of 10 girls or 10 women who can then stand by each other as they gain these 10 assets, but also after they gain the 10 assets, to hold on to the 10 assets and be part of the larger Apne Aap network, which then begins to campaign for changes in laws and policy. So, collaboration and education are the two keystones of the work we do, and the way to access all the human rights that we talk about. And that is how we are working to end sex trafficking. And I'm really pleased to be here among all of you to talk about this experience, because it truly is from this country that I got a lot of help. And I came and testified and showed a movie here, but then that helped my country. And today I'm here again to spark a conversation, and hope that by the time I come back next time, I'll see that there's a shelter for adult victims of trafficking, and there's a shelter for children who are trafficked, and they're not put into a jail. Thank you.
Have a bigger thing, right? What a story. Thank you very much. We have time for questions from anyone in the audience, or storytelling or sharing, anything at all, please. Yes, if you could just maybe stand and share your name, and there we go. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Beth. For full disclosure, I'm Kathy Lee's sister.
And you're Ruchira's sister.
Now you are.
Now I'm Ruchira's sister.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious about the role that boys and men play, because we saw in the documentary that boy who you're kind of castigating, and they are also kind of raised in this culture, to support the trafficking. And also when you mentioned, these girls will have a brother, and so you'll take them too. So I'm just curious what that, can you say a little bit about that impact?
Yeah, so the boys and girls boys in communities like this, in the caste ghettos, the boys actually don't even want to become pimps. And there have been boys who have run away from home just because they were being socialized into becoming pimps. And there have been fathers who were beaten up by upper caste gangs when Apne Aap organized the entire community to say no to prostitution. And when the upper caste gangs heard that these people had pledged not to put their daughters into prostitution, they showed up like in broad daylight at 6 in the evening and kidnapped one of our members, a woman, raped her 20-25 times and held her hostage. And they chopped off the ear of the father, saying that, how dare you as a low caste man decide to let your daughter go? And so the community began to demand that a police station be very close to where they were to protect them when such things happened. And that was one of our big campaigns, successful campaigns, to get a police protection for that community. But, so sometimes these men are also trapped in the hierarchies of caste and class, and they don't really know. But on the other hand, there are men who are completely desensitized growing up in these communities, who think this is normal, and they also, become lazy, they don't want to get a job, and they will let their daughters go into prostitution. There are brothers who we have been putting into school who have actually decided to challenge their own fathers. And just like the girls are standing up to saying we don't want to be prostituted, now there are boys who are saying that, this is not for us. We don't want to become pimps. We would rather be even auto rickshaw drivers or anything, any other kind of job that we can get. And they are our best allies. For example, we have a brother of a prostituted woman who's on our staff. And he's one of our principal investigators against the traffickers embedded inside these communities, and exposed so many trafficking rings that we've got 66 traffickers into jail now. And he was stabbed once for testifying against a trafficker. He faces risk and danger, but he continues. And he was educated by his elder sister who had been prostituted. in a boarding school, and you know, she told him, one day you have to stand up for girls like us, and he joined Apne Aap, and he's doing exactly that. So we have a combination of both kinds of people, and it's always a tug of war, as you saw. So this boy was kind of ashamed because he had been in our program, dropped out, his mother's an alcoholic, and the mother is now, she herself was trafficked, and then she started using drugs and alcohol to survive, and now she's so dependent on the drugs and alcohol that she's forced her son to become a pimp. She was about to put her daughter into prostitution. So, you know, so they know what they're doing is wrong. They're ashamed. And yet they give in.
Right here, and then we'll do the second one here.
Hi, it's Eileen. Gosh, I have a lot of questions. But you talked about mothers who had been trafficked, and these seem to be very young girls. What happens? How do they get out of this? Do they get to a certain age when they're no longer wanted, and then what happens? And can you talk about that kind of part of it? The other question that I had related to, is it all social and economic classes all across the world? You talk about low caste, and I guess there's low caste and high caste in India, but does it happen in high caste as well? So I'll quit.
To answer the second question first, across the world I've found that the majority of the trafficked are people who are underprivileged and marginalized. So according to the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, of the 27 million enslaved people in the world, more than 70% are women and girls, because women and girls are, of course, more unequal compared to men. The majority of the trafficked are poor. The majority of the trafficked are as teenagers. And in India, of course, they are low caste. I've never met an upper caste woman who was trafficked in India. In the United States, the other country where I work in a lot, I've met mostly people of color, black, Native American. In South Africa and other African countries, I've seen also indigenous groups more likely to be trafficked. So definitely the more marginalized groups are disproportionately affected by trafficking. And so it is a socioeconomic issue. But on the other hand, the demand is always formed by men. You know, I've not met female customers, female Johns anywhere. And also that the people who buy sex, they are normally both blue collar and white collar. They are educated and illiterate. They are people, men, married men, unmarried men. They are people living with their families while going out and buying sex. So it's you know, you can't really categorize that this kind of a man is more likely to buy a girl. But also what we found is some correlation to a few things among those who buy sex. And one is that they are a minority of men. Not all men buy sex, but they are repeat offenders because they become addicts for this kind of sex, which is sex with violence, sex with domination. And they have been influenced by pornography as teenagers. And you know, very often they begin to want sex with violence. Research is showing more and more, because that's what they saw on you know, small porn clips where a woman is being, that was their first encounter with sex. As 12-year-olds when doing homework and they were surfing the net and some cartoon character popped up and said, want to have fun with me, and 2 clicks later, they began to find that you know, she's being penetrated into every part of her body. She's crying and she's saying, give me more. So the confusing message for that boy was sex is connected with violence and domination, and no means yes, pain means pleasure. And so they began to want that kind of sex, and here we are. So the porn industry actually creates a demand for trafficked victims, and also then profits from it. So, you know, it's this huge sex industry. The other question was, what was your other question?
What happens when they're, I guess they grow out of it, they age?
Oh yes, yeah, I remember. So basically what happens to a prostituted girl, in India, the average age of a girl being prostituted the first time is between 9 and 13. And the youngest I've met is a 7-year-old. And in America, it's between 13 and 15, so not very different. Now, what happens is that because these girls are, there's repeated body invasion, right? Body penetration or rape is inherent to why a person is trafficked for sexual exploitation. And because of that repeated body invasion over months, over years, what happens is that the woman or the girl begins to develop all kinds of diseases. And I'm talking about from repeated abortions in the beginning to sexually transmitted diseases, to HIV, tuberculosis, jaundice, AIDS, to insomnia because she has to stand on the streets waiting for a customer come what may, otherwise the brothel keeper and the pimp will beat her up, to dependence on drugs and alcohol to cope with the experience of being raped all the time. And on top of that, she begins to also suffer from psychosocial trauma because she's beaten. There's huge violence inflicted on her by the customers and the pimps from cigarette butts being stubbed out on her, bottles being shoved up her vagina, repeated suicide attempts from the trauma, all of that. So she begins to suffer so much from so many things that it begins to show on her body. And she begins to look like a cardboard creature, disease-ridden, and very soon she is no longer commercially viable because the customer does not want to buy her. He wants to buy someone young and fresh looking. In Hindi, it's called Naya Mal, and which means fresh meat. And he demands that. So then the brothel system or the pimp wants to push her out. And this is in her late 20s. So prostitution is not an occupation that you earn more as you grow older. In fact, you earn less, and very often you get deep into debt, and then you die with diseases. So the old age pension in prostitution is disease and death. And so you're thrown out in your late 20s and early 30s with diseases, children, drugs and alcohol dependency, and nobody to look after you. And even mortality among prostituted women is high. And they say late 30s, early 40s, very early on prostituted women die, but we don't have data on it because nobody's tracking these women. They're disposable people, and we can't track them when they're inside brothels because they're so controlled by the whole mafia and all of that. So.
Thank you. One here, yes, please, and then.
Hi, my name is Mary Kate. I work here at CIE. Thank you so much for coming. I had a question about if there's any prevention campaigns going on before trafficking even happens. I don't know if that's possible or if you think that would be effective, or maybe it would pertain more to the girls who were maybe promised a high-paying job or tricked into it.
Yes, lots of prevention work. In fact, my own NGO, Apne Aap Women Worldwide's 80% of our work is prevention, because as I was explaining, it's, how much can you do after a person is so used and abused? You can only help her live with dignity for the remaining days that she has left and protect her children. But prevention-wise, we use education as a way to prevent. So for example, we fought over that girl and put her into a boarding school. So we try to go earlier and earlier, and the mothers are our allies, to put girls into school who are from these at-risk communities. So we actually identify and map where at-risk communities are and go in there and start first with the community classroom. Then we try to adopt a school which is sort of there, but nobody's using it properly, and use that as a safe space to bridge the girl into safety and, of course, skills and all of that. So that is a very, very important part of Apne Aap's work, is prevention. And the other part of prevention, and I truly believe this, that the root cause of trafficking is the demand. It's men who want to buy sex who are driving the industry. And so the other part of our campaign prevention work is actually to get Johns and traffickers into jail. First time Johns is fines and education programs, but for repeat offenders, stricter punishment. And traffickers, of course, now we've managed to change the law in India to get up to 14 years. And so, we think that will act as a deterrent, because this business will no longer be profitable, and we will have busted the demand in a way. And if there's no demand, then there will be nobody going around taking advantage of these girls' vulnerabilities. The other part of the campaign, which is going to be long-term, is that we are trying to discourage men from wanting to be part of the demand. And so we have a campaign called Cool Men Don't Buy Sex, which is with collaboration with students, where we go on to college campuses and sell t-shirts and wristbands saying Cool Men Don't Buy Sex. It's volunteer run, students run it. They bake cookies, even boys bake cookies in high schools and colleges and raise funds for that campaign. And talk about the consequences of buying sex and how it's not cool to buy sex. So we are trying to reach out to the next generation through that campaign and hope that things will change. And of course, parents can play a big role and teachers can play a big role. To quote, we are bringing up our girls to be like our sons, but now we really have to think about how can we bring up our sons to be like our daughters.
And while we're asking for this question, do we have any questions from the field online, some of the students in classes? Please.
My name is Meg. I'm also working here at CIEE, and I was wondering, as a leader in this movement, what advice do you have for us to become involved in our local communities and become agents of change in our local communities?
The first thing I would say is try to find which are the survivor-led organizations in your community and sit and talk to them. Either go to them or ask them to come to you and listen to what their needs are. And try to draw up a list from how you can help meet their needs. They might say that, we need you to work with us to march on the streets. We need your help to run an online campaign. There are survivors who are desperately seeking to create a shelter in this town, for both for children and for adults. Can students help them to create online campaigns and letter writing campaigns to your governor, to your senators, congress people, to give the budgets to run those campaigns? Can law students help them frame what the shelter looks like by looking at best practices from other places? So, there's a great need here, and survivors can give you the answers to that about what you can do specifically. But, you can do a lot of things.
My name is Ira Waltz, and I'm proud to say that I'm principal at Deering High School. And I want to thank CIEE for the 4 Girl Rising Scholars that I have here with me today. So my question is, as they're about to embark on a journey, what advice would you give them to make a difference?
I know you must be traveling abroad, right? So one of the things is that don't go with a patronizing attitude that whatever you've learned here and whatever your culture is the best. It's good, and everyone else's culture is equally good, and they are surviving in their own context. And maybe the solutions you offer, which are based in your context and your culture, may not be appropriate there. They may have less resources, they may have a different way of doing things, but that's all right too. And they are not to blame for the problems they have in their country. They might have been colonized, they may have had huge diamond mines, which some people are trying to mine, and created conflict there. So it could be anything. And so do not judge, but go to learn and to support and collaborate. And the most important thing to do is to listen. Because what happens is people tend to talk and they refuse to listen. And it's very important to sit in a circle at the level of the people you're going to and to listen. Very, very important, because you will get very few opportunities to listen to the other. It's your growing journey. You're not, and then try to help after you've listened. But try to help on equal terms.
Good advice. Thank you. Maybe time for one more question. Jarlath? And then we're going to have the great pleasure of having, we're going to break bread with the future global leaders here, so we'll have another chance to give some advice. Jarlath?
Hi, Jarlath Mcguckin, working enrollment here at CIEE. I was wondering about your stance or your views on countries that have legalized prostitution. When I was working for CIE in Russia, was able to go to Amsterdam for a weekend and was just amazed that it's legal there, it's out in the open. Do you think that that helps or hurts?
You know, of the 160 countries in the world, actually most countries have not legalized prostitution. There is only few cities and 2 countries which have legalized prostitution. So New Zealand and Germany are the only 2 countries which have legalized prostitution. And the cities which have legalized prostitution are Amsterdam inside Holland and Nevada in Los Angeles. Yeah, I think Bonn in Germany. So, you know, not that many as if we think about the number of countries and who has. And what many of these cities which have legalized prostitution have found that it has increased trafficking to those cities and to those countries, because what has happened is that it's created a sort of a localized industry, and traffickers know where to come and sell girls, and Johns know where to come and buy girls. And so it has not improved the status of women. And for example, if you go in Amsterdam, you will see that there are North African and Eastern European girls in the windows of the brothels. They're not Dutch girls. So it's actually increased trafficking. And in terms of whether it has improved the status of women, because I guess that's why these countries might have done it, was to improve the status of women. It has not improved the status of women because what it has done is normalize sexual violence to all women. So it has, for example, there's research in Nevada which has shown that there's more domestic violence there than in cities where there is no legalized prostitution. Because the men who are buying the girls begin to believe everyone's a commodity and they come home and they beat their wives too. And so that is one very dangerous outcome of this. In India, for example, you know, there was a huge rape done on a bus, very brutal rape with rods and objects and all of that on 16 December, just 2 years ago. And recently a documentary was made called India's Daughters, and in which the rapist says that he was actually going out with his 3 friends to GB Road to enjoy themselves. And then along came this girl at, in the evening. She was with a man who was not married to her. She was out at night. So they just shifted from going to the brothel district to raping her. Because in their heads, their mindset was all these women are prostituted women, and they had normalized the rape of girls. So when you normalize the rape of one set of women who are poor and low caste, actually you begin to create a culture where you normalize the rape of all women. So this is a very dangerous thing. Also inside prostitution, because the other thing was that maybe legalizing of prostitution will help prostituted women by regulating the industry, it will protect them. But again, what research has shown is that even the violence against them increases. Because the customers are buying domination and the customers are buying sex with violence. So in a city like Victoria, Alberta in Australia, research has shown that the legal brothels have had to remove even pillows from the brothels, because by the time the prostituted woman can press a button to call a bouncer, the customers try to snuff her out with the pillow. And you know, so the CCTV cameras, the bouncers and all don't really help the women. Ultimately, the woman has to be alone with the client or the John, and body penetration is inherent to it, so she has to be intimate with him, and he is violent with her. There are anecdote after anecdote, story after story of the women I've met everywhere in the world. They talk about cigarette butts being stubbed out on them, bottles being shoved up their vagina, them being beaten, rods thrust up them. And many of them have so internalized the violence, they don't even know it's violence. So, for example, when I was researching in a little caste ghetto outside Delhi, I asked the women, I said, have you faced any violence? And they said, no. I was really surprised and asked them, I said, you mean nobody beats you? Oh, all the time they slap us. I said, so are you, any objects used? Yeah, rods. One person was murdered. I said, any fractures? At least 2 a month in a community of 70 or so women. But I said, but that is violence. And they said, no, we thought it wasn't because he paid for it. So what happens is both the Johns begin to think it's all right to do anything if they pay for it, and the women think. So, you know, legalization of prostitution doesn't help the women in prostitution, doesn't help the women outside prostitution. It doesn't help men, because it changes their mindset, and all it does is creates a false notion of ethical demand, you know, that, yeah, it's fine, it's legal, I can buy it, she's looked after with a CCTV camera. it doesn't do anything for anybody. And in fact, it just devalues all of us and lowers the nature of livelihood that we as women want for ourselves. Do we want something which is inherently exploitative? That is the point. Because it's not like other sweatshop work. There is body invasion in prostitution, which cannot be legislated away.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to invite Kathy Lee to take this stage and have grab a microphone and say a few closing remarks and then wrap it up for us. Okay, Kathy? Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was less than a year ago when we realized that Ruchira was a possibility to bring to Maine, and then we asked her and she agreed, that I started to learn about this whole phenomenon. And like so many people that we've encountered in the last 4 days, my first reaction was, well, yeah, Thailand, Vietnam, India, that's where this goes on, not here, in my own community. And we found, although we're only now, with Ruchira's help, beginning to talk about it, that it is here. It's everywhere. And she's helped us enormously to start the conversation about what's going on here, about the fact that there isn't a single place for women and girls who want to leave prostitution to go that's safe. Not a single shelter, nowhere, which is one of the first problems. And the fact that people don't talk about it. So she's helped us to bust this open and start the conversation. So I want you to join me in thanking her for being here today and for helping us as a community. We're going to continue Justice for Women. We're going to continue expanding it and doing more with more community organizations. And we hope you'll continue to support us. And before we break, I just wanted to show you, we bought 250 bags, if you can show this, that the women of Apneap made for us as part of their job training. It says, Justice for Women, bringing global voices to the people of Maine. And we're selling these. 100% of the proceeds goes towards our causes. But pick one up on your way out. Thank you.